Built to complement the company's highly popular F27 Friendship turboprop, the Fokker F28 Fellowship of the Netherlands was truly a pioneer of the short takeoff and landing or STOL philosophy, attempting to bring jet transport to airfields that had previously been the sole domain of piston-powered airliners. Though due to the constraints of the firm's production facilities, which demanded a higher price and lower construction rate, the F28 would initially see little commercial traction, eventually carving out a niche for itself during the late 1970s and early 1980s, as it became a must-have model for the deregulated airline market. The Fokker F28's origins begin in the early 1960s, where at the time Fokker, one of the pioneering aircraft manufacturers that had been established way back in 1912, had seen a huge post-war resurgence thanks primarily to its innovative F27 Friendship turboprop of 1955, a high-wing twin-engined regional airliner that presented a sturdy, flexible and well-performing design that could easily outperform piston-powered equivalents such as the Douglas DC-3 and the Vickers Viking. The F-27, upon its entry into service in 1958, becoming the most successful turboprop airliner ever built at the time, beating out the pioneering Vickers Viscount of Britain and going on to sell 586 units by the time production ended in 1987. Fokker, enthused by the performance of the F-27 as it opened up many regional airfields to fast and efficient turboprop transportation, moved rapidly to create a jet alternative that would not replace the F-27, but instead complement it in the product lineup, with the subsequent Fokker F-28 being announced on April 28, 1962, at that year's Hanover Air Show. The new jet model being proposed to have a capacity of 50 seats, incorporate a T-tail, and be powered by two Bristol-Siddeley BS-75 turbofan engines mounted at the rear of the fuselage, essentially a mimic of the contemporary BAC-111 and Douglas DC-9, although it would be considerably smaller. The F-28's performance being a maximum cruising speed of 530 miles an hour at 21,000 feet, and a range, with maximum payload, of 956 miles, making it suitable for operations into smaller, possibly unpaved runways as short as 4,000 feet. Fokker initially envisaged a straight wing proposal for the F-28, which incorporated lift dumpers that extended automatically on touchdown, with 5 on each wing eliminating the need for thrust reversers, and thereby reducing weight and overhaul costs, these being supported by a split air brake at the base of the tail fin that could be extended hydraulically during descent for a stabilized approach at higher power settings and simplify overshoots if necessary, while the auxiliary power unit would be fitted in the rear of the fuselage, and to further reduce the F-28's dependence on ground equipment, also featured built-in air stairs as part of the main cabin door on the port side, plus lower fuselage cargo hatches. Though as design work progressed, Fokker opted to take on a swept-wing configuration and revised the internal capacity to accommodate 65 passengers in a 2x3 seating arrangement, with the Bristol-Siddeley power plants being replaced by Rolls-Royce Spey 555-15 turbofans, which were a simplified version of the Spey already in use on the Hawker-Siddeley Trident and the BAC-111 airliners. Much like the preceding F-27, which was brought to fruition through a state subsidy of 27 million guilders, or $10.6 million, the F-28 also required financial support from the Dutch government, with a loan of 103 million guilders, or $38.3 million, being granted on February 18, 1964, which would be repayable through a levy placed on F-28 sales. Although due to Fokker still requiring further sources of funds so as to bring the project to fruition, the company signed collaborative agreements during the same year with West German firms HFB, which manufactured the engine nacelles and the fuselage structure from the wing to the rear pressure bulkhead, and VFW, which built the rear fuselage, tail unit, and the fuselage section ahead of the wing, while the Short Brothers Company of Northern Ireland took on construction of the outer wings. Market studies projecting a requirement for 250 aircraft over a 15-year period in order to break even, which presented a modest production rate of around 1 aircraft per month. And while this was a comparative dribble when put up against the mass assembly being undertaken at Douglas in Long Beach and Boeing in Renton, the slow build rate was to overcome the logistical obstacle of limited floor space at the company's Schiphol final assembly line, thus leading to a relatively high unit cost and a slow response time to orders. Ultimately, the first Fokker F-28 prototype, Papa Hotel Juliet Hotel Golf, was rolled out of the Amsterdam Schiphol production plant on April 4, 1967, and through an internal competition held in the company newspaper, the model was christened the name Fellowship, continuing the naming theme that had started with the preceding F-27, the prototype undertaking its maiden flight at a very early 05:20 a.m. on May 9, 1967, with the 75-minute voyage being commanded by Fokker chief test pilot Jas Mol, while the second prototype, Papa Hotel Whiskey Echo Victor, followed suit on August 3rd, and the third prototype, Papa Hotel Mike Oscar Lima, on October 20th. These 3 F-28s being used for the flight testing and certification program, with a Dutch certificate of airworthiness being issued on February 24, 1969, followed by American FAA certification a month later. The certification of the airliner being complemented by an intensive sales tour undertaken during early 1969, which saw the prototypes visit Australia, followed by a 6-week visit to the Middle and Far East during 1970, where the airliner proved its worth when it operated into the 5,100-foot-long unpaved airstrip at Skardu in Pakistan at an elevation of 7,600 feet. Launch customer for the Fokker F28 was West German charter airline LTU, which ordered 2 units on November 17, 1965, before undertaking the first commercial flight with the type on April 2, 1969, working a flight from Dusseldorf to Palma. Although despite LTU being the launch customer, the very first revenue-earning flight of the F28 had actually been conducted 5 days earlier on March 28 by Norwegian carrier Brathens, who had ordered 5 units in 1967 and operated the third prototype on lease from Fokker to conduct early commercial services from March 1969, Brathens eventually taking on 6 examples that worked domestic flights out of Oslo's Fornebu airport down on the waterfront, while also working charter services. As was the case with F28, Lima November Sierra Uniform Charlie operated from Tromsø to Longyearbyen Airport on Spitsbergen, the largest island of the Svalbard archipelago in the Barents Sea near the North Pole, in April 1972, becoming the first passenger jet to land on the remote island. Despite the early success in Europe of the F28, Fokker's design philosophy wasn't unique within the marketplace, as across the border in West Germany, their partner in developing the F28, VFW, was in the process of creating their own equivalent model, dubbed the VFW-614, and thus, in exchange for providing construction assistance in developing the F28, VFW merged with the Fokker company during 1969 to form VFW-Fokker, the hope being that the merger would allow VFW-614 jet to be marketed via Fokker's commercial arm and allow for overall support of the scheme. This collaboration being later seen in the eyes of industry observers as a deliberate con by Fokker to acquire a potential rival and then ensure that the model saw little to no marketing, thus eliminating the threat from their own F28. This theory being illustrated in the fact that, despite the unhappy union of Fokker and VFW, the 614 only ever sold 19 units throughout its short production life, and wasn't heavily marketed by the Fokker commercial team in the same manner as the F27 or F28, thus causing the collapse of the partnership in 1979 and eventually the failure of VFW overall in 1981. Back with the Fokker F28, the airliner gave rise to multiple variants that extended beyond the original Mark 1000 that could accommodate up to 65 passengers, the first being a modified cargo variant of the airliner that included a forward freight door on the left side, and could easily be put to work as a combi model for use in passenger and freight operation, this variant being dubbed the Mark 1000C, while in April 1971, a stretch version dubbed the Mark 2000 was released that included a 7-foot 3-inch fuselage increase that upped the passenger capacity to 79, followed in September 1973 by the Mark 6000, which took the previous Mark 2000 and fitted it with a new wing that increased the span by 6 foot 11.5 inches, and added leading-edge slats, while also introducing improved SPEI engines that included noise reduction enhancements, the Mark 6000 being launched alongside the Mark 5000, which incorporated the same wing and engine improvements of the 6000 and applied them to the fuselage of the 1000, deletion of the wing slats leading to the Mark 3000 that was again based around the fuselage of the 1000, and the Mark 4000, which was based around the fuselage of the 2000, and incorporated other improvements, including an updated cockpit and a redesigned cabin to seat up to 85 passengers, the Mark 4000 being launched in October 1976, and would become the most commercially successful F-28 variant. In 1978, Fokker considered a revised version of the F-28, which took the fuselage of the Mark 4000 and applied engines mounted in pods beneath a pair of supercritical wings, while maintaining the original T-tail configuration. The revised model, capable of carrying up to 160 passengers, being originally proposed as the Fokker Super F-28, but in 1979 was renamed to the Fokker F-29 due to its many differences to the original rear-engine twinjet, the concept being to create a machine that would satisfy the newly deregulated market of the United States, where low-cost regional carriers were starting to rapidly emerge to undercut the legacy trunk carriers, and would have entered sales in competition with several upcoming models, the Boeing 737-300, the McDonnell Douglas DC-9 Super 80, and, in the long term, the Airbus SA-1, later to be dubbed the A320, Fokker again calling upon the Dutch government to provide a state subsidy of 150 million guilders, or $78 million, while at the same time seeking industrial collaboration with various partners in Europe, America and Japan with no success. Airbus being busy working on the SA-1, Boeing fully committed to the 737-300, and the Japanese aircraft industry, specifically the Nihon Aircraft Manufacturing Corporation or NAMC, Being more interested in supporting the stronger aircraft building industry of the United States, the closest Fokker came to entering a full partnership being with McDonnell Douglas during November 1980, who were in the process of developing a twin-jet replacement for their controversial DC-10 trijet dubbed the DC-XX, a collaboration with Fokker essentially marrying the aspects of the DC-XX and the F-29 to create a single shared airliner, although eventually, McDonnell Douglas opted to continue maintaining a trijet configuration and would develop their own new model as the MD-11 of 1990, while the F-29, against a proposed launch date of 1983, a year ahead of the Boeing 737-300, struggled to find any further investment or interest from either airlines or aircraft builders, and thus the project was wrapped up. In a bid to improve sales success within the highly insular United States, the company also proposed, as per a previous agreement with the F27 Friendship, a potential tie-up with Fairchild Hiller to create an American-assembled version dubbed the FH228, which would be built under license at the company's factory in Hagerstown, Maryland, alongside the existing FH227. The previous collaboration between the Dutch and American manufacturers, seeing a contract rapidly signed on February 1, 1967, and would call for a 50-seat airliner powered by the new Rolls-Royce Trent engine. Early market research suggesting that, with production taking place at the larger facilities in Hagerstown, up to 250 examples could potentially be built, with Fairchild Hiller ordering 50 sets of components for assembly. The sales pattern expected to be that FH228s would be sold exclusively in the Western Hemisphere, while Fokker's original F28 would be marketed across the rest of the world, though sadly, after 2 prototypes being produced at Hagerstown, further investigations by Fairchild Hiller as to the potential commercial success of the FH228 led to their abandonment of the scheme due to it having no demand that would allow the project to break even, the terms of the agreement being ultimately changed to allow the American builder to buy 10 Fokker-built F28s for marketing in the United States, so as to test the waters for any potential interest that could warrant a revival of the licensed production deal, though this only served to further emphasize the lack of interest in the F28, as only 3 of the 10 were sold in North America by Fairchild Hiller, 2 for Canadian airline Transair and 1 for a corporate customer, the remaining 7 being returned to Fokker and later sold elsewhere. At the latter end of the 1970s, though, with deregulation of the American airline market, new opportunities to sell the F-28 in the United States were opened as smaller carriers quickly emerged, with the first American order for the F-28 coming in the form of Empire Airlines and the Philadelphia-based Altair, the latter of whom bought 3 Mark 4000s, though these were barely operated prior to the airline's bankruptcy in December 1982, leading Empire Airlines to acquire these units, plus a further 14 examples, that operated on services from Syracuse and Rochester in upstate New York to destinations such as New York City's JFK and LaGuardia airports, as well as Newark Airport in New Jersey, while Piedmont Airlines acquired 20 F-28s, using 9 of them in 1985 as dedicated aircraft on the Piedmont shuttle service between the cities and regional centers of Florida, before eventually acquiring Empire Airlines on May 1, 1986, and thus integrated that carrier's fleet of 17 units into their own roster, which, alongside a further 8 new aircraft ordered, led to Piedmont being the largest operator of the F-28 in the world, with 45 units on their books. This fleet being maintained following Piedmont's acquisition by US Airways in 1989, who operated F-28s until 1997. Other notable operators for the F-28 included 3 units worked by British carrier Air Anglia, who leased their aircraft from Fokker so as to run the Aberdeen and Edinburgh to Amsterdam and Paris shuttle services, as well as a North Sea service from Aberdeen to Stavanger that was used by crews and executives of the oil and natural gas businesses of the North Sea, while KLM's subsidiary, NLM Cityhopper, used F-28s on services from Amsterdam and other Dutch industrial centres to destinations including Paris, Antwerp, Brussels and London Heathrow from the late 1970s, with French carrier TAT, who used F-28s to replace their small fleet of VFW-Fokker 614s, taking on several units that worked franchise services across Europe on behalf of both Air France and British Airways, and thus carried both their liveries. In Australia, this nation played host to the longest F-28 operated scheduled route, and at the time the longest twin-jet route in the world, when McRobertson Miller Airlines employed their F-28s on fly-in, fly-out or FIFO routes between Perth in Western Australia and Kununurra in the far north of the country, which was at the heart of Australia's diamond mining region, this service being 1,392 miles in length, and thus pushed the F-28 to the very limits of its capabilities. While due to the exceptional demand of FIFO flights to other mining areas in Western Australia, F-28s of McRobertson Miller Airlines also illustrated the highest utilization of the type, often operating over 8 hours per day, while at the same time, the F-28 also had the distinction of being the first jet aircraft to ever land in Antarctica, when the president of Argentina's own personal F-28 landed on an improvised 3,300-foot ice runway marked with stones at the Marambio base on the Antarctic Peninsula in preparation for a state visit by the then recently re-elected president, Juan Perón. Sales for the F-28 passed 100 units in 1975, and by mid-1979 over 150 units have been processed by the Schiphol factory, although come the 1980s, the once somewhat unique position held by the airliner began to be lost as new competitors rapidly emerged to take on the Dutch jet, with most larger airlines preferring the Boeing 737-300 and McDonnell Douglas MD-80 due to their higher capacity and flexibility when it came to accommodating the ever-increasing passenger demand. While for regional runs into short fields, 1981 saw the release of the first true competitor to the Fokker F28 in the form of the British Aerospace or BAE 146, a four-engine short-haul airliner that married performance and noise abatement through the use of Lycoming power plants originally developed for Canadair business jets, while at the same time being more specifically tailored to the needs of regional operations and being able to command a lower asking price due to the enlarged production facilities at the Hatfield factory in England not presenting the same constrained floor space as Fokker's Schiphol plant, which pushed up production cost and construction times, British Aerospace also being able to undercut the F-28's premium cost by way of offering startup airlines with little financial capital long-term, low-price leases on 146 airliners, which, while proving troublesome during the airline market downturn of 1992 and nearly pushing British Aerospace to the edge of bankruptcy during that year, illustrated huge commercial success initially, meaning the F-28 was now well and truly left out of the picture by the middle of the decade, and while 19 orders were taken for the 1985 fiscal year, production would ultimately cease a year later, after 241 units were sold to 57 customers in 37 countries, 29% of which were in North and South America, 27% in Asia, 23% in Europe, and the remaining divided almost equally between Africa and Australasia. As for accidents, the Fokker F28 Fellowship had been involved in 17 accidents resulting in the cumulative deaths of 644 people, the first accident involving the F28 being on December 23, 1972, when Brathen's Safe Flight 239, flying from Ålesund to Oslo, crashed on approach to Oslo Airport due to an incorrect signal being transmitted by the ILS systems at the airport, foggy and dark conditions with strong winds, and improper practice by the pilot, who was found to be conversing with air traffic control about their upcoming Christmas celebrations, thus causing the crew to become spatially unaware and take what they believed was a commonly used shortcut to the airport 12 miles too early, the crew believing they were on final approach to the runway, when in fact they were landing in an area close to the lake of Asdaltjern in Vestmarka, approximately 5 miles from the airport, leading to the deaths of all but 7 of the passengers and crew initially, although 2 later died of their injuries, and a third would succumb to the effects of the crash in 1976. On March 22, 1992, US Air Flight 405, working from New York's LaGuardia Airport to Cleveland, Ohio, struggled to climb away from the runway due to an improper de-icing procedure, which left copious amounts of accumulated ice on the wings of the aircraft, meaning with increased drag and reduced lift, the airliner could not climb safely away, thus leading to a sustained stall and subsequent crash into Flushing Bay, just beyond the end of the runway, causing the deaths of 27 out of the 51 passengers and crew aboard. On July 1, 1994, Air Mauritania Flight 625, working from Nouakchott to Tidjara in Mauritania, crashed due to a hard landing while operating in sandstorm conditions, thus leading to the landing gear collapsing and causing the airliner to slide off the runway and impact with a rocky outcrop at the edge of the field, causing the aircraft to burst into flames, which consumed the F-28, together with 80 of the 93 passengers and crew aboard, resulting in the worst accident ever involving the Fokker F-28 Fellowship. The latest incident involving the F-28 took place on January 9, 2003, when TANS Peru Flight 222, operating from Jorge Chavez International Airport to Chachapoyas Airport, crashed into a vertical face on the Quirá Coyhaique mountain at an altitude of 11,320 feet, just 35 feet short of the summit, causing the deaths of all 46 aboard, the wreckage of the aircraft only being found 2 days later, although it was apparent that none of the occupants of the Fokker survived the initial impact with the peak. In terms of service, the Fokker F-28, by August 2006, registered 92 units still in regular operation, 15 of which were former examples of the Ansett Group in Australia, although with the exceptional rise of new regional jet airliners, such as the Canadair CRJ and Embraer ERJ, together with new emissions and noise regulations, the F-28s rapidly fell out of step with this new legislation, and mass withdrawal quickly gathered pace, now leaving only 2 examples believed to still be in civilian operation, both of which are in Africa, while government and military examples include 5 units that are worked by the governments of Ghana, Indonesia, the Philippines and Tanzania, maintenance for models of the former Fokker company, being made available by Fokker Services of Woensdrecht in the Netherlands, while spare support for the F28 is now provided by Aeroned, also based in the airliner's Dutch homeland. However, while the F28 left sales in 1986, having not seen the forecast success hoped by the Fokker sales team, the program continued into the latter half of the decade with an enlarged and advanced variant that would reshape the design for the challenges of the 1990s, although even with this optimized and functional new aircraft entering sales, the losses made on the Fokker F28, together with an increasingly saturated market for regional airliners, would see the updated model fail to save the Dutch builder from complete collapse.